Well, thanks for coming. Originally, as it was just explained, I thought a lot about all the changes in the industry. And it's clear, just from the last presentation, that there's a lot of new ideas. And actually now, for the very first time, the capability to pull off some of these technology changes that could really impact the industry. And we've seen a lot happen over the last few years. I mean, the impact of mobile, companies like Twitch that brought social into the gameplay, the kinds of games that are being created today, games like Minecraft, all are really, really good signs of a growing industry, irrespective of platform changes, which we should be all enjoying over the next few years with the PlayStation 4 and the Xbox One. So instead of talking about the things that you guys are already working on, I wanted to take a moment and put on a little bit of a Washington perspective. And I think this is really important. You know, I had the opportunity of being in the games business for 25 years, doing things like Tetris and Falcon and working with great designers like Sid Meier, and lived in that era. And then I got kind of carted off after Wizards of the Coast and Magic the Gathering and Pokemon to go help the Central Intelligence Agency, quite frankly, not only incorporate new technologies in what they were doing, but help that workforce transition to a much younger workforce. So the perspective right now in Washington, quite frankly, is that gaming is bad. I could walk up to any senator or congressperson, behind the scenes and off the record. You know, I have a Senate staff badge. And when I'm not putting on my national security hat, pretty much all our social ills are blamed on games, right? Games are bad. They're making our kids antisocial. They're causing all sorts of social problems. And, the industry responds typically with, a bad event takes place, somebody blames the gaming industry, and we show up with our, typical lobbyists. We put out appropriate press releases, and we pray that that will be the end of it. So let's talk about the war on gaming. Sitting, watching the NRA, head of the NRA, stand up and blame Sandy Hook on video games was a major wake-up call. Not because he blamed the industry, but because it was so easily doable for them to do it. California, we have a state senator who tried to pass a law, thank God for the judicial system, saying that there's this thing called the First Amendment. But if he had his way, would have restricted video games. Glenn Beck, even the American Academies of Pediatricians, fundamentally, at the end of the day, points to video games as something that you should keep your kids away from, much less the adults. And we've seen this before. Every generation, like clockwork, there's a new blame for all the social problems. In the 1940s, it was, you can't let your kids listen to The Shadow. You can't have them just space out in front of the radio. It's wrong. It's bad. Then in the 50s, there was a declared war on the Hill on comic books. They had to come up with a rating system and a little sticker of approval that we still live with today that nobody remembers what was the origination of that little sticker on the side of the comic book. But that was because it was perceived at that time that comic books were a tool to brainwash the current generation, comics. Then, of course, rock and roll music in the 60s, followed by television in the 70s, and what took place in places like China with the internet in 2000, where you would cart your kids off to these camps that will unbrainwash the brainwashed kids with a new form of brainwashing so that they wouldn't be brainwashed anymore. If you can follow that logic, whatever. So let's take a look at the list that the American pediatricians the list of bad social outcomes that are caused by games. Now, I am not saying that games misuse, as with any addiction, you can be addicted to surfing, addicted to playing chess, and pretty much end up with all of these same kinds of characteristics. Right? We all know that. The kids who push wood up in, Central Park in New York, or, the surfers who are kind of hanging out in Hawaii or California, all have some sort of addictive behavior, but the language that is being used is now part of the popular vocabulary, right? Screen time is bad. You've heard that, right? Limit your screen time. Don't let any kids under the age of 2 have any screen time. Games are making our kids dumb. It's much better that they sit in front of a television set, I guess, right? Games are making our kids fat, to make our kids bully each other. They have poor school performance. There's violence. And study after study that is funded. Now, when you do a scientific, I'm the chairman of the National Federation of Scientists, right? So I work with real scientists, not the ones you just hire to kind of have a viewpoint. And one of the things you do in a controlled experiment is you don't start with a conclusion. If you start a study with a conclusion, like I want to do a study that shows that video games causes sexual behavior, right? If I start with that hypothesis, I'm going to find evidence of that. And if you look at the amounts of studies that are being done around gaming, the huge disproportion of studies that start off with a negative premise leading to a negative result is really outstanding. It's unbelievable. There have been studies, mostly, interesting enough, done by the US government, mostly by the Department of Defense, that actually looked at games and sees the benefits of gaming, right? So here's the things that we learned about video games, particularly in the US military, but it also applies to business. Kids who have been exposed to games tend to have faster decision-making skills than kids who don't play games. They have better problem-solving skills. They usually don't accept binary outcomes. Yes, no, win, lose. You can't do it or you can do it. There's always an answer to solve, and there's always a way to solve it. And there's a huge amount of other positiveness that results from people who play games. And this became very evident in the first Gulf War. So there was this battle called 73 Easting. There's a platoon of M1 tanks led by a young lieutenant whose job it was to scout out for the Republican Guard. Now, platoon is not very big. It's a handful of tanks and a handful of, there's M1s and some Bradleys. And he pops over this hill, and he sees 2 brigades of T-72s dug in of the Iraqi army. His commanders said, turn around. And he countermanded that order and said, we're going in. A, because if I turn around, all my armor's on the wrong side, a bad thing's going to happen. But more importantly, he used his own judgment. And that platoon, being outnumbered like 10 to 1, totally decimated the dug-in Republican Guard. And the conclusion in the after-action reports were that the Americans were able to think faster on their feet, shoot faster, react faster, and make decisions than the other side. And that launched a whole number of initiatives within the department. Unfortunately, a lot of that information never got out to the popular press because it's kind of like the military. So it gets me to this point. The industry can choose to be either proactive or reactive. Reactive is waiting for the bad event to take place, somebody passing legislation, an event that takes place that somehow is blamed on video games, and then we can respond, or we can be proactive. And proactive means about getting in front and winning the cultural war. And the cultural war around gaming is this concept that kids who grow up and learn through this new interactive media can be better, more creative, and is a long-term advantage to society than kids who have not. So we have this industry, a $93 billion industry. Think about it, $93 billion. We talk about how big we are. We're bigger than the music industry. We're definitely bigger than Red Bull, bigger than GoPro, right? But when you kind of look at the popular mainstream press, the only time video games are discussed is when kids are engaged with video games. When kids are talking about GoPro, or even, they're there with their boards, X Games. They're there out in sports. They're out engaging in other activities, right? And they understand, those brands understand the importance of linking other activities to what is socially representative of the people who use their products. And gamers do a lot more than simply play video games. Back one slide. One of the things I'm proposing is the industry should invest at least 0.1% in promoting and understanding the benefits of gaming. The actual amount we spend are 2 orders of magnitude smaller, right? I mean, think about the scholarships the Academy gives out. We give out $2,000 scholarships, maybe 4 of them in a year. That's not socially changing anything, right? When a kid is thinking about going to college and applying for scholarships and grants, they're thinking about sports scholarships, they're thinking about academic scholarships. They're not thinking about gaming and interactive art scholarships because there's just not enough of them out there. So let's talk about developing an institution or an institute, since we're part of the academies. If we had that pool of money, which is, as a percentage of the industry, I would say would pay for itself overnight, right? Just think about every time somebody says, don't play video games, Johnny, or the teacher says to the parent, you really, take those Xboxes and PlayStations, throw it away. Do not let the iPads we give you out of our schools have any games on it. First of all, we need to invest in building a more positive image around games. We need to invest in research, real research, and not just about game mechanics, but what are the appropriate outcomes that come with gaming. We need to establish safe use standards because we care about our families, we care about our kids, we care about safe use of games. Please, please, you never want to have Washington produce a standard for you. Nothing good can come of politicians coming up with standards for the way you should live your life. We need to, quite frankly, invest in interactive education initiatives as a part of what we do, because play is education. We unfortunately for us old people who have been in this industry, and I'm looking at Don, for way too long, somewhere back in the 70s and 80s, and we were coming out of the cassette tape world and into the floppy disk world, we decided there were 2 different industries. There's that learning industry, and then there's that gaming industry, and they really need to be one and the same, and we need to celebrate both. Because interaction is just a different form of learning. Play is the most fundamental way people learn. So we need to be leading these initiatives. If we had that pool of money, we could get into the schools on how to use your iPads and have more engaging software and activities for kids. That we should be supporting the maker movements in those labs. So kids who know how to program, whether it be a Lego robotic or a 3D printing machine or writing Scratch, this industry needs to back that. And we should be writing the checks because we have the funds to do so. We choose not to do it. We should be sponsoring physical ed programs. It's interesting, one of the recent studies found that kids who play video games, particularly sports games, tend to play more real physical sports than kids who don't. They go in, they play a game, they'll play Madden, and they'll go out and try out a move, or FIFA, or rollerboarding, or skiing. Those are the things that we should be supporting in every school and for every kid in America. For 0.1% of this industry. And the payoff to the industry is not just a better image, not just more appropriate use, but an advantage of our culture. One of the things that the American culture has always had an advantage of is that historically we have embraced technology. It's in our bones. It's not just an activity, it's the way we think about the world. We look at technologies, unlike other cultures, as the great opportunity. And gaming is the new version of science fiction that gives our kids the ability to imagine a better future. But it's up to us to script it out. It's our global advantage. It's interesting that the White House and the Congress funded an initiative called the Digital Promise. The Digital Promise, which was signed by Congress 10 years ago, but acted on only last year by the president, said that when we thought about education, because US test scores are declining, the Finns are always beating us, the Korean and Chinese kids are smarter than our kids because they have higher test scores. The realization that technology is a learning advantage because irrespective of our test scores, globally our kids, when they grow up, perform better in actual productivities and outcomes. But that's not talked about. And the White House said, let's start an initiative that says being digital is good, not bad. So when you look, there's this book written called God Games, 2004, published by the Harvard Business School. And in this book, they talked about kids who grew up around gaming, and when they got into the workforce, the advantages those kids had versus the kids who were not involved in gaming. And this is the laundry list. This is the laundry list of the things that they found. And what's amazing about this laundry list is every time we say, define what a successful person is, we always say the same things. They're learners, they're thinkers, they're creative, they can think out of the box, they're social, they have great leadership skills, they have great teamwork. Every one of these skills are enhanced by play. And it's what we do best. So we have a choice. Invest and be game on, or be reactive and be game over. We're going to be at a cross point. Because, quite frankly, with the new game boxes that are out there, and then the ability now that we can network all these video game machines together, and kids would rather watch somebody play a game on Twitch than watch the Super Bowl, especially this Super Bowl. It wasn't much of a game. People are going to, again, look at what those kids are doing hours in and hours a day and ask the question, is this a good thing or a bad thing? And we're an easy target to be the bad thing because we have a weak voice. Too little, too late. But we can change that. This academy, the Software Association, the rating boards, even to get out the votes. One thing you learn in Washington, if you're not there every day, you're not there at all. And it takes commitment. It takes owning the language. It's not screen time. It's creative time. Right? It's not addiction. It's play and learn. If we don't own those words, then when the next Sandy Hook comes down, we're going to be right center back in their targets. So enjoy the awards tonight. Celebrate, have lots of fun. Build those next great games. But for any of you who are involved in any of these companies, no matter you're just a little apps company or you're working for Microsoft, Sony, Electronic Arts, Take-Two, demand an investment in changing the message, because it's a message worth changing. And this is an industry not only worth defending, but it's a way of life that will lead us to a better generation. So thank you very much.